In our last session, we focused on getting the health bar to work and taking damage in collisions. In this session, we're going to look at scoring. And so I've already taken the liberty of downloading some frames from an image. So if you want an animated sprite, you're going to actually need a series of pictures, one for each frame. I'm going to add a new object here. It'll be a sprite, and this is going to be a coin. So we'll just say coin, and we're going to add an animation. Now, as I've said, I've already gone and downloaded frames for an animated coin. So I'm going to add, and then notice here are the individual frames for my coin. I'm going to select them, and notice that it adds them all in. Since they were numbered by frame, it adds them in the correct order. And then I can apply that, and now I'm going to add that to the scene. Now, if I play it, you'll notice that it animates once and then just stops. Well, you may have already seen that there was a setting for that. There's actually a setting to make the animation loop. But I do want you to pay close attention to how it's animating. So notice that it's not really rotating around the center of the coin. So there's a couple of things we need to do to fix this. I'm going to go back and edit that object. And I'm going to, first of all, tell it to loop. You can also change the interval of time that the images take to actually animate. But I'm going to edit the points of these images. So if I hit edit points, notice that there are 2 points here, okay? And right now, all of them are sharing the exact same points, and I'm going to turn that off. And then as I look at each of these points, you'll see that there is actually a point right there that represents the center of the image. And if I go to the next frame, that one looks pretty good. 2, that looks okay. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. But let's see what happens when we actually run this again. So I'm going to hit apply. Notice though that it is still animating up against this edge. And you have probably figured out that that's because there was another point that we had to be paying attention to. This red point right here is actually the location of the coin. And by default, it's going to be up in the upper corner up here. So what I'm going to do is I am going to use the center of the coin as its location. And you might have to zoom in a little bit to get it positioned accurately. Oops, did I move the wrong one? Maybe. So I'll just move those. And notice that they're actually, you can set the coordinates here yourself. So if you want to be more precise than what I'm doing, that's totally okay. For now, I'm just moving them so that you can see the effect, and I'm not going to get too worried about the exact locations here. If they are within a pixel, or half a pixel, I guess, you're not even going to tell the difference. So let's go ahead and apply that, and let's run it this time. Notice that the coin shifted a little bit because its location, and you can see that I do have a little bit of an error with one of those frames, that it's like jostling up and down a little bit, and that's where I would just go and I would carefully set the coordinates of those centers. Now I'm going to move this coin, and I'm going to drag another one out and another one. And we're going to make it so that we can collect these coins. So to do this, there's a couple of things that have to happen. One, I need to check if I'm colliding with a coin. And two, if I am colliding with a coin, then I need to remove the coin and then give some points to my score. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, also last session, we talked about the fact that when I move my player, notice my player goes behind other things. And there is a setting that allows me to change that. So if I look at this object right here, you'll see that the Z order is 5. So Z order over here. If I look at this object, its Z order is 2. And if I look at this one, its Z order is 4. Well, Z order is how far out of the screen does this object appear to be? And so to make sure that my player is always in front, I'm actually going to change the Z order to 100. And then if I test this, now if I move, notice that my player moves in front of everything else. Now, there may be some things I don't want to be in front of the player. So for instance, the health bar, well, I can set it to 200. Okay, and usually I go in increments of hundreds for broad categories of things. So like the player, I set it at 100. Everything below the player would be below that. And then the GUI stuff, I might set at 200, and then everything that needs to be arranged in the GUI would be somewhere in the 200s. But it's really up to you how you choose to do that. So now I can move. I'm in front of the coin, but I'm behind the health bar. Okay, so let's go ahead and collect these coins then. So we're going to go to our events, and I'm going to add another collision. This time I don't need a timer to keep track of how frequently I'm colliding, okay, because I'm just going to remove the coin. And so the trick will be remove the coin before you add score. That way it doesn't keep adding to your score. So let's add a new event, and this will be a collision event. So I'm going to do a collision of an object, and we're going to collide. It's the coin and the player that are colliding. Now, which order you put these in really doesn't matter. If one's colliding with one, the other one's colliding with it. So the order doesn't really matter. But if I have set this up correctly, now I should be able to remove the coin when we're ready to do that. So I'm going to add an action, okay, and I'm going to remove this coin. Now, you might be able to guess this, but when you're trying to remove an object, you would want to go to the object menu. Hopefully, you've kind of seen this pattern now that when you're working with objects, you start with the objects menu. And in this case, we're actually trying to change the object itself. And we're going to delete an object. So in this case, we're going to delete a coin. Now let's see what happens. So we're going to say, okay, delete a coin. And then there's one more thing we want to do though. We want to add a score. But if you remember, we haven't actually talked about displaying the score correctly. So we should probably set up the score before we do that. But let's watch what happens when we hit the coin. So I'm going to move up. Notice that even though I've only chosen coin, GDevelop has been smart enough to recognize that I had a coin here that I collided with, and I'm trying to delete a coin. And so it deletes the one that I just collided with, which I think is pretty cool. I don't need to tell it which coin that I actually collided with. It's smart enough to connect those two things together. So let's go back to our scene now, and we need to set up a score. So I'm going to add a new object, and notice that one of the objects I can add is text. So we are going to add text. This will be the score text, and I'm going to put the word text in there so I don't confuse it with the score variable that I created earlier. And we're going to give it some default text to start out with. So score 0. And you can change colors and fonts and things like that. So let's not do that. Let's just leave it the way it is. And let's drag this over here. It's just going to use the default font. Notice I may have to make some adjustments to locations of things here. And I'm going to write some code now to make sure that the score gets initialized. And then every time I hit a coin that the score increases. And then we'll update the text of our score text. So let's go to the beginning of the scene. We're going to start by setting the score. And in this case, remember score is a global variable. And there is a difference between object, scene, and global variables. And it's very important that if you've created variables that have the same names or similar names, and one's an object and one's a global variable, that you are very careful about which one you're actually working with. But it's probably a good idea to keep names different just to avoid that confusion until you're comfortable with that. But I'm going to change a variable, but this time it's not a variable assigned to an object. It's a variable that's global. So I'm going to go to variables. Notice I could mess with just scene variables, but I created my score for the whole game so that I can move from level to level and my score keeps adding up. So I'm going to go to global variables and I'm going to set the value of a global variable. And then notice that the only global variable that's available right now is score. I'm going to set it to 0. And you could set it to anything you wanted. If you wanted a starting score, that's fine. You can do that. And we'll say OK. And just like with the health bar, every time I change the score, I'm going to get in the habit of changing the score text. So I'm going to add another action. Even though technically I don't need to do this because I've already set the default text, I'm going to do it anyway. So I'm going to go set the text object. So there's a text object, and I'm going to change its text. I'm going to modify the text. And so there's the text object I'm going to change. I'm going to set it to, and here's where it gets a little trickier. I'm going to keep the word score in there. Or you could actually make two separate text objects and have one that was always score and another one that was just a number, and that's fine too. But I'm just going to use one score text object up at the top of the screen, and I'll take the score, the word score. Notice that it's inside quotes because it's actually what's called a string. It's a sequence of characters, numbers, symbols. So I'm going to add to that now. I want to add a score. Well, score is a number, not text. So what I'm going to need to do is say global variable string. What this does is it goes and grabs a global variable and converts it to a string. And in this case, the global variable that I want is the score. Once again, if you didn't know that that's what you needed to do, you could always click this formula bar. You could go find the text of a global variable, choose score, and notice that it throws that piece in there for you. That way you don't have to know the exact names for these things. And then I'm going to say OK. And every time that I change the score, I need to make sure I update this. So I'm going to copy this. And when I collect a coin, one thing I'm going to need to do is update the score on the screen. So I haven't actually changed the score yet, though. So I'm going to add another action. And once again, we're changing the score, which is not an object variable. It is a global variable. We're going to set the value of that score by adding this time. Instead of setting it to a number, I'm just going to add something to the score. And then you need to decide how much you want to add each time. So maybe I'm going to add 100 every time I collect a coin. And I say OK. Now, if you've been following what's going on, you may see that there is a serious problem in what I just did. Because I updated the screen, the text on the screen, before I changed the score. So I'll always be lagging behind the score by one coin. So I'm going to move this, I'm going to drag it up above and reorder these so that the score gets changed first, and then I update what I see on the screen. So now if we run the game, I'm going to move and notice that now I'm able to collect 400 points worth of coins. If I hover over my bear, my enemy bear, then I lose health. And just to summarize, we covered mostly today just how do you work with global variables and display their values on the screen. And then we also took just a moment to talk about ZOrder and how things are ordered on the screen and how you can change that. So next time, we're going to do some new things. See you then.